Welcome to our training video on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Art Project Grants for fiscal year 2025, which runs from July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025.
I'm Carolyn Koska, the Grants Administrator for Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. During this training, you'll learn about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, the guidelines for this grant program, the resources that are available for you on our website, how to use our online grant system, the application questions you'll need to answer, and the grant process, or what happens after you submit your application. Check out the chapters below if you want to go directly to a particular topic. For now, we'll start out talking briefly about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council.
Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor, create, and promote the arts in their communities. Here is our region down in the southwest corner of the state. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota, working to get state arts funding out into all corners. So most of our funding does come from the state of Minnesota, with an allocation from the State General Fund, but the majority from the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. We also receive funding from the McKnight Foundation, which we use for our artist grants, and from memberships and donations from around our region. To be a little more specific about our region, applicant organizations need to be located within that region, which includes 18 counties: Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lac-qui-Parle, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock, Swift, and Yellow Medicine, and also 2 tribal nations: Pajutazizi, Upper Sioux Community, and Chanshayapi, Lower Sioux Community. We acknowledge that the SMOC region occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. Art project grants are open to 501c3 nonprofit organizations, units of government, which would be city, county, or tribal government, or public schools with community projects. If your organization is operating in the spirit of a nonprofit but doesn't have its 501c3 status yet, you can apply using a fiscal sponsor. This would be a 501c3 nonprofit organization or one of the other types listed in the previous slide. And this fiscal sponsor organization would receive your grant funds for you and be ultimately responsible for the project. In your application, you'll need to include an agreement between your organization and the fiscal sponsor organization that spells out how money is going to be managed among those 2 organizations, and someone from the fiscal sponsor organization will also need to sign your application. The intent of the Art Project Grant Program is to encourage the creation, performance, and appreciation of the arts, and this program is the one that most organizations' arts activities will fall under. The kinds of projects you could apply for include things like music, dance, or theater performances, and these could be either brought into the community or put on by community organizations. Activities could also include visual art exhibits, readings by authors, art classes for community members, public art, and arts festivals. Our project grants are available for up to $7,000, and no matching funds are required, which means that as long as your project costs are under the max amount of this grant, your organization won't have to put up any funding toward the project. There is a funding limit to how much an organization can receive in a year in SMOC grant funds, and that limit is $20,000 across all grant programs, except if you are receiving operating support from us. Those funds do not count toward that $20,000 limit. Some eligibility items to be aware of. The following are not eligible for these grants: projects that don't have an art focus, activities of a for-profit project, organization, or business, educational projects within a school system, Schools should look at our Arts in the Schools grant program for those. Activities that take place outside of Minnesota, we are using state funds for these grants, and that is a requirement of those state funds that activities must take place within the state. Also not eligible are activities that are not open to the public, religious socialization of the participants or audience, fundraising events. In other words, the grant funds should allow your project to break even, not to make a profit. And so your activities should not include fundraising for either your organization or for another organization. Also ineligible are payments of debts incurred before the grant begins. You cannot use grant funds as a match for another SMOC grant. If you are already receiving operating support from us, you cannot include prorated operating type costs in this budget. If you are receiving a direct Minnesota legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund for fiscal year 2025, you are not eligible to apply. And finally, if you have a past due final report still outstanding. We have 3 deadlines throughout the year for this program. The first is July 24th, with an earliest project start date of September 1. Round 2 deadline is November 13th, with a start date of January 1st. And round 3 deadline is March 12th, with a start date of May 1st. On each of these deadlines, you'll need to make sure that you submit your application by 4 p.m. on that date. The system will not allow you to submit after that time. And note that this is a change from previous years when the deadline was 4:30 p.m. You'll need to choose a start date for your project. And in doing that, you'll first want to check for the earliest allowed start date for the round you're applying for. You can't start any project activities before that start date, and this would include things like ordering any supplies, holding auditions, doing any advertising, and you can't expend any funds before that start date. If there is something that you would need to pay for before that date, for instance, if you had to put down a deposit on something early, then you could not include that cost in your project budget. You'll also need to choose a project end date. You'll want to give yourself plenty of time to complete the project activities and then also evaluate the project. For instance, if you are purchasing some equipment, you'll want to allow not just for the purchase, but also for some time to use the equipment and get some feedback on that. Also be aware that projects awarded in fiscal year 25 need to be finished up by June 30th of 2026. So that is the latest end date that you could choose. Your project will also need 2 people connected with it. You'll need a project director, and this will be the person who is most directly responsible for the day-to-day activities of the project. And then you'll need an authorizing official, and that is someone who has authorizing power for your organization, like your president or treasurer. These do need to be 2 separate people, and both will need to sign all of your grant documents, including the application. Next, we'll go over to our website and look at what resources are available for you there. Here on our website, we'll take a look at the Grants tab, which will have everything that you need. First, here is the login to the grant system, which we'll look at in a little bit. And then there is information on each of the grant programs. Here under our grants for organizations, we'll find our art project grants. And first here is a link to the full art project guidelines. So make sure to take a look at those. Earlier we talked about some of the eligibility things to be aware of, but make sure to read through just to make sure that you are not missing anything. The Apply Now button will take you to our grant system. And then we have a list of important dates for each of our grant rounds. We also have a training video for our art project grant program. Right now we have our video from last year sitting here, and soon our current one will be available. We also have some information about the grant workshops that are coming up this year if you follow this link. And here are those dates for our other rounds. And at the bottom of the page, we've got some materials available for you. We have our guidelines again. We have application questions in a Word document in case you'd like to write your draft in that and then paste into the system later. We've got budget forms, scoring information, so you get an idea of what the reviewers will be looking for, and even the final report questions, again, if you want to get an idea of what you're getting yourself into with this project. And then we will head over to our workshops and assistance page. Our workshops and assistance page outlines all of the ways that you can get help with your application. We have grant support open office hours on the second Tuesday of each month. You can stop by our office in Marshall from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. While you're there, you can talk through project ideas, sit and work on your application with staff there to answer any questions. Maybe you need some help preparing your work samples or working on a final report, but you can just stop in and get the help that you need. We also have some grants Q&A sessions. There are a series of those in person, so look to see if we are coming somewhere near you, and these will be updated as we have specific dates scheduled. We also have virtual sessions available. You can register for those here. And for both of these, you can learn a little bit about all of the grant programs that are available and then have time to ask questions about your specific project and get those answered. This year we also have a couple of workshops on some specific grant writing topics. First on reaching underserved and underrepresented communities, and then on grant goals and evaluation, so you can check those out. You can easily schedule some time to meet with me. You can just click this link and choose a time on my calendar, and we can meet by phone, by Zoom, or in person at our office in Marshall. And then here are videos of our past workshops that we've had as we are recording our videos for our fiscal year 25 grants. Those will also appear here. There's one more page with resources for you, and that is our credits and resources page. So we've got links to grant credit lines and logos that you may need to be using for your marketing. Then we've got a sample contract, so you can see what that looks like ahead of time. If your organization is using a fiscal sponsor, there's a sample agreement available here. If you're doing a project where you need a cooperative agreement with your facility owner, there's a sample agreement here for that. And then we've also got some accessibility resources here for you. And now we'll head over to our grant system. That brings us to our login page. You can enter your email address and password here if you already have an account in the system. If you are totally new, you can click Create New Account. If you're not sure whether you or someone from your organization already has an account in the system, you can contact us and we can get that figured out for you. But for right now, we are going to log in. And as we first come into the system, a reminder, if you have also worked as a grant reviewer or panelist, for us to remember to switch your role to applicant. And here we are on our applicant dashboard. So this is where you will come when you log in to the grant system. Unless you are coming in for the first time, then you will be brought straight to this apply page. On the Apply page, all of the grants that are currently available are listed here. So you'll find the one that you are looking for. In this case, we're doing art projects. You'll see there's a preview button down in the corner. So if you'd like to take a look at the application first without actually starting anything, you can do that. But we're going to jump right into the application, so we'll hit apply. A couple buttons at the top to point out before we get into the actual application. If you need to be working in another language, we have Google Translate embedded into the site, so you would be able to choose your language and it will translate the interface and all of the application questions for you, and you can work in that language. We also have the Copy Previous Answers button. If you've done an application in the system before, it will bring up a list of those and you can choose which application you'd like to copy from. And it will copy over answers to any questions that are the same between those two applications. So if you have worked in the system before, it can give you a bit of a head start. We also have the Collaborate button, and this is in order to enable somebody else to work on the application with you. This allows you to invite them by putting in their email address, and then you can select the level of permission that you'd like to give them and just put a little message here saying whatever it is that you'd like them to do. If you want them to add some budget numbers, just proof things for you, sign the application, those are all things that they could do. So they'll receive an email and they'll just need to create a password to come in and look at the application. Unless they already have an account in the system, then they will just use that login. There's a reminder for how to get help as you're working on your application, and you'll start out with a name for your project. There's some examples here, and we just remind you, don't put your organization name within the project name since we already have that. Then you'll fill in the amount you're requesting, though you'll probably want to wait until you have done your budget form to fill this in. We've got links to some of those documents we looked at before, along with some tips for as you're working on your application. You'll see that the character limit for most of the fields is pretty big, and we don't expect you to necessarily fill that all in. If you feel like you fully answered the questions, that's good enough. No need to pad things out to fill up the text box. You'll start out describing the project that you want to do. It does remind you that you'll be asked about some details later on, so not all of that needs to go first in this project box, but just explain what it is that you are wanting to do in this project. Here's where you'll enter your start date and end date. Then we've got a place for you to put the details for events for your projects. It's really important to put as much information here as you can because we use this to put your events on our area arts calendar. Next, you're asked to tell us more about the artists and programming involved in your project. What is the artistic vision behind what you're doing? Which artists have you chosen? Why have you chosen them? How did you decide either on specific artists or if your group is putting on its own productions, a particular play or music selections? Just how were your choices made? You'll need to provide resumes or bios for the artists that are involved. If you have not chosen those people, you can include information about job description of what they're going to be doing and what you'll be looking for, how you'll be conducting that search. Then you'll include samples from the artist. Again, depending on your project, this could be samples from artists that you're hiring, or if, again, your organization is putting on its own programming, samples of your choir singing, for example. There are some links if you're wanting to resize or combine some files That'll help walk you through what to do for that. Something new this year is some rules around social media samples, because not everybody reviewing your grants might have access to social media like Facebook or Instagram. We're asking that you don't provide social media links as your only work samples. So if you do want to provide something from social media, first make sure your profile is public, but also we ask that you include some screenshots from that to link in the upload fields. So we have a few fields where you can upload samples along with some links that you can share, and we ask in the text boxes that you describe what it is you're attaching or linking. Next, you're asked to think about the underserved or underrepresented in your community. So we ask you to describe groups in your community that could be underserved or underrepresented in your organization. You might think about race or ethnicity, language, socioeconomic level, gender, ability. And if you want some more information about your community, the Minnesota Compass site is very helpful. It has a little more information than you might find from just the regular census. You can put in the community that you are working in. So here's our example. And you'll see it's got information about things like age, race or ethnicity. I'll point out when the data says suppressed, it just means that either it's a really small number, so they're not including that right now, or there's a larger amount of margin of error around that number. But you'll see that you are given some helpful information. You can see how much of your population is made up of people with disabilities. You can look at things like income, transportation, and this will just help give you an idea of who in your community might be underserved by your organization. So once you've identified the groups in your community that might be underserved or underrepresented, then we ask you to pick at least one of them and come up with some specific things that you're going to do to reach out to or involve them in your project. And we do remind you that saying that our activities are open to everyone does not really answer this question. We're looking for specific outreach that you're going to be doing. So that could include things like involving members of that group in your planning. Maybe there are special admission rates, translating your marketing or programs. Maybe you're providing transportation or childcare, recording things to make them available to those who aren't able to attend, and really making direct and individual connections with people from that group so that they feel welcome. And we realize that your organization may already be made up of members of the group you're focusing on, and if so, you have some room to explain that as well. Then we ask you to specifically address accessibility. How will the project be accessible to those with disabilities? And please consider more than just mobility. Look at vision, hearing, etc. If your organization does have an ADA access plan, how does that affect your planning for this project? Next, we ask you to look at the impact and outcomes of your project. Why is this important to you? Does it meet particular community needs, artist needs, your organization's needs? And then what is the specific impact you expect this project will have? And you might look at what are changes that might happen for people's artistic skills, knowledge, attitude, behavior, and you can look at participants, audiences, artists involved. So really we're looking for what are people taking away from this? What are the actual changes happening as a result of this project? And then you'll need a way to measure or prove that these changes have taken place. So you'll need some way to gather results or feedback. So maybe you're doing some kind of survey and make sure that it includes questions related to those changes that you're hoping will take place. And then once you have those surveys back, what kind of answers are you looking for that will say, yes, this was successful? As an option, you can include a survey or other kind of evaluation tool here. Then we ask you to estimate some audience numbers, how many artists, adults, and children will be involved in benefiting from this project. Then looking at some more of the logistical details, are there any other people that are going to be very involved in the project that are not the artists that you listed earlier? Maybe there's a project director who's responsible for a lot. If so, you can include information about them. But it's possible you might not have anybody else to talk about here, and it's fine to just say that. No worries there. But there's a spot if you do have someone to upload their resume. We ask about your planning schedule and also about your plan for marketing. We also ask about community support, who from your community is supporting your project in some way, which might be financially, in kind, donating space or time. What are any collaborations that you might have with other community organizations? Next is your budget. And we have an Excel form here that you can use, or you can create your own thing. But if you can at all, I would recommend using the Excel form because it will do some adding for you that will be helpful. So here's the form. You can put either the name of your organization or name of your project here, and then you can just start listing expenses that you're planning to have and putting amounts in here. And you'll see it is adding up for you. Then you've got a space where you can put in some other funding that you have for the project. This might be ticket sales, this might be other donations. So we'll stick some money in there. And then you'll see it calculates for you how much you can request. It takes your cash cost minus your other funding and tells us your request cannot exceed $5,000 or the maximum request amount for this grant program, whichever is less. So we'll take a look. Our art project is $7,000, $5,000 is less, so that's how much we can request. But let's say our project is more expensive. Now it tells us our request can't exceed $8,000 or the max, whichever is less. So in this case, $7,000 is less. That's how much we can request. But now you'll see that down at the bottom, our profit equals minus $1,000. So that means you'll need to come up with some more income, whether that's some more donations coming from somewhere. So now you'll see our profit equals 0 and we're requesting $7,000. So you would fill this out and save it and then upload that into the application here. A new question this year, we ask you to tell us if you have applied for or received Minnesota State Arts Board funding for this project as well, and ask you to explain that here, and if you have, include that in the income section of your budget. We have a budget narrative field, and you can provide some more details about your budget here if they don't all fit into the budget spreadsheet. If you want to break down some of your costs more or explain particular purchases, you can do that here. We ask for some information about your organization, including mission statement, brief history, what types of programming do you do, who do you generally serve. Then we ask about your board, how were the board members chosen, How do you make sure they represent the diversity of your community? How often do you meet? And then we also ask you to provide a list of board members with their roles and qualifications. So you can either provide board members within this question field, or you can upload a board list here. This next section is just some data that we need to collect and doesn't really have any bearing on your application. We ask for your most recently completed fiscal year, and then which organization type are you. If you are an arts organization, you'll see there's a box that appears to enter your total expenses for that year. If you are a non-arts organization, you're asked to enter your expenses for the arts for that year. Then you're asked about some demographics, about your organization leadership, about the communities you serve, some ethnic characteristics, what your total audience numbers were from that year that you entered above. And then we're just curious to know which of our options for assistance you may have used during this application process. Finally is just some contact information, name of your organization. Here's where you can enter your project director, your authorizing official. We just ask you to indicate who the grant writer is in case we have some questions. Then you'll answer if you're using a fiscal sponsor or not. If yes, the fields will appear for you to fill out that information along with that agreement with them that you need to provide. You can upload that here. But if you are not, then that will not show up for you at all. And then we've got signatures here at the bottom, and this is a great place to use the collaborate button in case you need to invite your authorizing official or your fiscal sponsor to come in here and sign. And then one final quick thing that we're doing in the first part of our year, we're participating in a statewide survey on our application processes among all of the regional arts councils. So there are some quick questions to answer here with some feedback on how this process has gone for you. And that won't have, again, any bearing on your application at all. The people reviewing your application will not see these survey questions. So down at the bottom, there's a submit button for when you're ready, and there's also the save application button as you're working. As you are working on your application, it will be auto saving for you, but if you decide to click the save button, it'll give you a list of the required questions that you still need to answer to kind of help you track your progress. So right now, there's pretty much everything there since we haven't filled anything in, but that can be helpful to see where you're at in the application. So if you wanted to keep working, you would click continue, but we're going to go back to our dashboard. And you'll see now here's this art project application that we just started. And if you want to go back in and continue working on that, you'd click edit application. And then this will be the same place you would come back if you're awarded a grant, and it'll have your contract and your final report for you. And now we'll head back over to our slides. We have some tips for you as you're working on your application. First, make sure to think ahead to choose the best timing for your application. So check out the deadlines and start dates and see what makes the most sense for the timing of your project. Then read the guidelines and criteria carefully. As we mentioned before, we went through most things, but there are probably a few things that are in that written guidelines that we may not have covered. So make sure to take a look at that so that you're not surprised by anything. It's also good to start working on your application early. If you are needing to gather information from other people, if you might have some questions you need time to get answered, just make sure to give yourself plenty of time. Also in the application, you have noticed that a lot of the questions had multiple parts to them. So make sure you are addressing all of those and really answering those fully, that you're not missing any of those pieces. Also, as you're writing, you'll want to keep your answers real clear and concise. As we mentioned before, no need to try and fill up the text boxes if you feel like you fully answered the question. And also, no need for any fancy grant language you might think you need. Just using everyday language is fine, as if you're telling a friend about the project. Another suggestion is to not assume that grant reviewers know anything about you or your project. We have reviewers coming from all around the region, so they may not have heard of your organization or be familiar with you as an artist. So be careful about including acronyms without spelling those out, talking about certain programs without explaining. Just assume as you're writing that the person reading doesn't know anything about what you're doing. And finally, we are here to help, so don't hesitate to contact us with any questions. There are multiple ways to get assistance with your application. You can certainly contact us to talk through your project before you're getting started. Make sure you're under the right grant program. Make sure elements of your project are eligible. You can also get answers to questions about the application as you're working on your project. And finally, we can do a review of your application draft before you submit it. If you let us know up to about 2 weeks before the deadline, we can guarantee that we're able to look through your application, give you some feedback, let you know if you're missing anything, if anything might sound confusing to the reviewers. This does not guarantee funding of your project, but we are able to give you some feedback. So another great reason to start working on your application early in order to have time for that part of the process. So what happens after you submit your application? The first thing is that SMOC staff will review it for eligibility and completeness. And if at that stage we find that something is missing or there's an eligibility concern, you'll have 48 hours to fix whatever that is. And then at that point, the group of applications from the round will go on to a panel of individuals from around our region who will discuss and score the applications based on the criteria for the program, which we'll look at in a minute. And then finally, their recommendations go to our board of directors who make the final funding decisions. And that most often just involves taking the applications in ranked order of score and taking the funding down the list as far as the budget goes. The criteria for the art project program include artistic quality and merit of the project, which is worth 50% of your score. The impact on the participants and audience, worth 22% of your score. Reaching the underserved or underrepresented, worth 14% of your score. And your ability to accomplish the project, also worth 14% of your score. And we'll go into a little more detail about those. So in looking at artistic quality and merit, they're looking, do your activities have high artistic merit? Do they have potential for participants to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts? Do your artists have an appropriate level of experience? And does the artist's work show technical skill and artistic vision or voice? For reaching the underserved, they are looking that you are able to identify underserved or underrepresented groups in your community. They're looking for specific attempts on your part to reach out to and involve at least one of those groups, and they're looking for some efforts toward ADA accessibility. For impact, they're looking to see the importance of the project to the community, whether it meets artistic needs for you, if it shows growth for your organization or the community, if you have identified proposed changes to take place as a result of the project, and then if you have plans to measure whether those changes have taken place. And finally, for your ability to accomplish the project, they're looking to see if you have an appropriate timeline, budget, marketing. Do you have community support? They're looking at the strength of your organization, board, and non-artist personnel. And finally, if you have received previous SMOC grants, have you completed those successfully? After the panel has completed its scoring, you may also be able to be awarded some additional points if you meet some of the following criteria related to SMOC funding priorities. So if you are a first-time applicant to SMOC, if your organization is led by or primarily serving BIPOC or LGBTQ communities or people with disabilities, or if you are from a county that hasn't received as much funding from us recently. So you could be awarded up to 3 additional percentage points for each of these criteria, for a maximum of 9 additional percentage points added to your score. If your grant is awarded, you'll need to complete a contract, and we saw where those would be located in the grant system a little bit ago. And then payment of your full grant award will be sent to you after the contract is received, and you'll have an option to receive that electronically or by check. You'll need to acknowledge your grant on any publicity or marketing materials that you have. You'll need to include the credit line that can be found in your grant contract. And you might also need to include this Minnesota Legacy logo depending on the source of your funds. But all of these credit materials and logo files, etc., will be sent to you, so you won't have to worry about which options you need to include. And we also looked at the credits and materials page on our website where some of that information is available also. We understand that things happen as you're working on your project. So if it's looking like you may need to make some changes to your original plan while your project is in progress, contact us and we may be able to help with things like extending your project end date, approving some changes to your budget. So no worries if things change, but just make sure to contact us and get those changes approved. You'll be receiving a reminder partway through your project, checking in to see if anything has changed and what kind of changes might require a project change request to SMOC. You'll have a final report due 60 days after the project end date that you have chosen. So once you start your project, it's a good idea to go into that report and check what information you'll need to be gathering. There are some audience demographics questions, for instance. So make sure to look ahead what kind of information you'll need to be gathering during your project. And that's the last of the information that I need to share with you today.
Thanks for joining us for this grant training. Don't forget to take advantage of the options for assistance as you work on your application. Feel free to contact us with any questions you may have. Good luck!